On the 19th of December 1944, within a repurposed French military barracks in Verdun, the most senior commanders of the Allied forces were assembled. A profound gravity filled the room. Not a single countenance bore a smile. 72 hours prior, a force exceeding 200,000 German soldiers had shattered American defensive positions in the Ardennes forest. This offensive had achieved total strategic surprise against Allied intelligence apparatuses. American units were being overwhelmed, encircled, and systematically destroyed. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower convened this urgent council to formulate a response to the unfolding catastrophe. The predicament was dire. The 101st Airborne Division was completely isolated at Bastogne. The fall of that town would permit German armoured divisions to bifurcate the Allied armies and potentially drive to the coast. Eisenhower surveyed the assembled leadership and posed the pivotal question: how swiftly could an offensive be mounted to the north to relieve the besieged forces at Bastogne? A heavy silence descended. The generals contemplated their maps, performing mental calculations of logistics, troop displacements, supply routes, the formidable distances, severe winter conditions, and the chaos of extracting units from active combat. Then George Patton spoke. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours. The other commanders turned to stare. Some presumed it a jest. Others believed it mere theatrics, an impossible pledge. To disengage 3 divisions from intense fighting, pivot an entire army 90 degrees, move over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles through snow and ice, and launch a coordinated assault against entrenched German positions was, operationally, considered impossible. Every officer present understood this. Yet Patton was neither bluffing nor grandstanding. He was the sole commander there who had anticipated this attack, and for 11 days he had been preparing for it. On December 9th, 10 days prior to the Verdun conference, at his headquarters in Nancy, France, Colonel Oscar Koch entered Patton's office bearing a stack of intelligence reports that would alter the war's trajectory. As Patton's G2, or Chief Intelligence Officer, Koch was meticulous, detail-oriented, and deeply concerned. He had been tracking German unit movements across the entire Western Front and had discerned a disquieting pattern everyone else seemed to ignore. 15 German divisions had vanished. These were not minor formations but full-strength divisions, including several panzer divisions with hundreds of tanks. They had been withdrawn from the front line, but Allied intelligence could not ascertain their location. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, offered an explanation. The Germans were holding these divisions in reserve to counter Allied breakthroughs. Koch was unconvinced. His months of study indicated the Wehrmacht did not amass such offensive power merely to react. This was force sufficient to launch a major attack. Koch spread his maps across Patton's desk, indicating the Ardennes forest, a thinly held sector where American divisions were stretched across a front requiring triple their number. "General," he stated, "I believe the Germans are planning a major counter-offensive. The target is here, the Ardennes." Patton studied the maps as Koch presented his case. The Ardennes was the Allied line's weakest point, its difficult forested terrain with narrow roads deemed impassable for a major winter offensive. Scheff considered it an improbable axis of attack. Yet Koch reminded Patton of 1940, when the Germans had done precisely that, conquering France in 6 weeks. He presented further evidence, escalated German radio traffic, prisoner interrogation reports, and civilian accounts of unusual activity. Patton posed a direct question. "If you're right, when does the attack come?" Koch's reply was immediate. "Within the next 2 weeks." Patton telephoned his superior, General Omar Bradley, and detailed Koch's analysis. Bradley listened but remained skeptical, echoing Schaff's assessment that Germany was beaten and incapable of a major offensive. He advised Patton not to concern himself. Upon concluding the call, Patton regarded Koch silently for a moment before issuing an order. "Start planning." Over the ensuing 10 days, Patton's staff operated in secrecy, developing 3 comprehensive contingency plans for a German offensive in the Ardennes. Each plan was meticulously detailed, encompassing truck routes, pre-positioned fuel, artillery redeployment schedules, and specific unit assembly points. Patton's officers wondered at the purpose. The Third Army was engaged in offensive operations to the south. Why plan for a defensive crisis 100 miles north? Because Patton trusted Oscar Koch more than he trusted Scheff. On December 12th, Patton instructed his senior commanders to be prepared to disengage on short notice, offering no explanation. By December 15th, the Third Army stood alone as the only major American force with prepared contingencies for the Ardennes. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, German artillery erupted along an 80-mile front. The surprise was absolute. 3 German armies assaulted 4 outnumbered American divisions. Communications failed, units were overrun. At Scheff, initial reports were dismissed as a localized counterattack. Disbelief reigned at Bradley's headquarters. The 106th Infantry Division was virtually annihilated, resulting in the largest mass surrender of American troops in the European theatre. At Third Army headquarters, however, the reaction differed. Patton received the initial reports and summoned his staff. He looked at Koch. "You were right. What's their objective?" Koch analysed the data. "Bastogne, they need the road junction, and then Antwerp." Patton nodded. "Get me General Gaffey. We're executing the contingency plans." While other commands scrambled, Patton was already issuing orders. The Third Army began disengaging from its southern operations. The other generals would spend 3 days determining a response. Patton had solved the problem 11 days prior. At the December 19th emergency meeting in Verdun, Eisenhower, reframing the crisis as an opportunity, asked his commanders when a relief attack toward Bastogne could be launched. After a protracted silence, Patton spoke. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours, 3 divisions in 72. The room fell quiet. Eisenhower, wary of empty promises with the 101st's fate hanging in the balance, pressed him. "George, this is no time for grandstanding." Patton did not flinch. "Ike, I've already given the orders. I have 3 contingency plans prepared. I've been expecting this attack for 11 days. Eisenhower, studying the man he had known for decades, recognized his seriousness. "All right, George, get moving." Patton departed and placed a single brief call to his chief of staff. "Play ball." Those 2 words activated the meticulously prepared plans. Within minutes, a colossal logistical movement commenced. Over 133,000 vehicles began navigating snow and ice on pre-designated routes. Supply lines pivoted north, divisions disengaged and redeployed. What seemed a miracle was the execution of a plan. The movement, executed in brutal winter conditions, was relentless. By December 21st, lead elements of the 4th Armoured Division were in position, having moved over 100 miles in less than 48 hours while disengaging from combat. On December 22nd, the Third Army attacked. The fighting toward Bastogne was brutal and fiercely contested. Inside the besieged town, the 101st Airborne, low on everything, famously replied "nuts" to a German surrender demand, holding firm in the belief that relief was coming. At 4:50 p.m. on December 26, 1944, the lead tank of the 4th Armoured Division, Cobra King, broke through the final German positions at Assenois, making contact with the 101st Airborne. The siege was broken. Patton called Eisenhower. "We're through to Bastogne." The narrow corridor was held open, and vital supplies began to flow into the town. The Battle of the Bulge would rage for another month, becoming the bloodiest American engagement of the war, with over 19,000 killed. Yet the losses would have been catastrophic without the relief of Bastogne. The intelligence failure was severe. Over 200,000 German troops had achieved complete surprise. The damning truth, however, was that someone had noticed. Oscar Koch had tracked the vanished divisions and predicted the offensive. Scharf, operating under the assumption that Germany was defeated, had dismissed the evidence. Other commanders, including Bradley, were briefed but unconvinced. Only Patton listened. Only Patton prepared. Post-war interrogations revealed German shock at the speed of the American counterattack. They had anticipated a week's delay, not 4 days. General Hasso von Manteuffel later noted they had expected a rapid Patton response, but were stunned to discover he had prepared for their specific attack. The strategic repercussions were profound. The German offensive had delayed the Allied invasion of Germany by approximately 6 weeks, at a staggering cost. However, it had also exhausted the very resources the Reich needed for the defence of the fatherland itself. The Rhine now lay virtually undefended. For the Allies, the near disaster forged a hardened resolve and provided harsh, invaluable lessons in vigilance, intelligence interpretation, and the priceless value of operational flexibility and preparedness. In the aftermath, official inquiries into the intelligence failure were conducted. The complacency at SHAEF was scrutinized, yet the story of Oscar Koch and George Patton stood in stark contrast as the exemplary model. It demonstrated that the crucial link in the intelligence chain is not the analyst alone, but the commander who possesses the discernment to recognize truth amidst prevailing wisdom and the will to act upon it. Patton's legacy from the Bulge is not merely one of dramatic relief, but of profound professional competence. A commander who understood that victory is built in the quiet days of preparation long before the first shot is fired in surprise. The Battle of the Bulge, therefore, endures not simply as a tale of American resilience at Bastogne, but as a timeless case study in the military art of foresight, trust, and the transformative power of being prepared. The final act of the Ardennes campaign was not a climactic battle, but a grim, methodical process of reclamation and reckoning. By the end of January 1945, the landscape bore the brutal scars of the conflict: shattered forests, burned-out husks of tanks half buried in snow, and villages reduced to rubble. The Bulge had been flattened, the front line restored. The cost had been catastrophic for both sides, but it was a price the Allies could replace and the Third Reich could not. The Wehrmacht's last strategic reserve in the West was irrevocably broken, its finest remaining panzer units reduced to skeletal formations, its infantry decimated. The road to the Rhine now lay open, its defences critically weakened by the Gambit's failure. In the weeks that followed, a semblance of normalcy returned to the Allied command structure, but nothing was truly the same. The shock of the near catastrophe had seared away any lingering illusions of a prematurely defeated Germany. A new steely realism permeated Supreme Headquarters. Intelligence assessments, once filtered through a lens of optimistic inevitability, now treated every German capability with heightened suspicion and rigorous scrutiny. The assumption of enemy exhaustion was replaced by a doctrine of calculated respect for German resilience and operational cunning. For the men of the Third Army, the Bulge cemented the legend of old blood and guts. They had witnessed not a reckless gamble, but the culmination of meticulous planning. The seemingly impossible movement north had been executed not by magic, but by predetermined routes, pre-staged fuel dumps, and rehearsed orders. Their faith in Patton's demanding leadership was validated. He had asked the impossible because he had first arranged the means to achieve it. The army's morale, already high, transformed into a formidable sense of invincible competence. Yet for the architects of this preparedness, there was no grand ceremony. George S. Patton received no special medal or promotion for his decisive role. His reward was operational: Eisenhower's reinforced trust and the green light to unleash the Third Army in the colossal drive across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. His actions in the Ardennes became the definitive proof of his axiom: a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. Oscar Koch, the quiet, brilliant intelligence officer, returned to the shadows of G2 work. His prescient warning, one of the war's most accurate tactical forecasts, remained largely unknown to the public and was often relegated to a footnote in official histories that preferred to narrate the battle as a story of heroic perseverance rather than averted failure through preparation. Within the professional circles of military intelligence, however, his reputation became legendary. The Koch report entered lexicon as a shorthand for actionable, contrarian intelligence that must be heeded. The deeper, more enduring legacy of the Battle of the Bulge transcends tactics and individual glory. It stands as an eternal object lesson in the anatomy of surprise and the architecture of resilience. It illustrates with brutal clarity how institutional consensus, the unwavering belief at Schärf that Germany was incapable of a major offensive, can become a blinding filter, causing analysts to explain away rather than confront disturbing evidence. The counterpoint, embodied by Patton and Koch, demonstrates that true security lies not in optimistic assumptions, but in paranoid preparation for worst-case scenarios. It highlights the critical, often fragile link between the analyst who sees the threat and the decision-maker with the authority and courage to act upon it. Patton's genius was not in agreeing with Koch, but in trusting him enough to redirect an entire army on his judgment, a bureaucratic and professional risk far greater than any taken on the battlefield. Thus, the final lesson of the Ardennes is not merely about tanks in the snow or a besieged airborne division. It is a perpetual reminder that in the face of uncertainty, preparation is the ultimate form of strategic foresight. That the most important victories are often won in the quiet rooms of planning, long before the first shot is fired in anger. And that when the moment of crisis arrives, history belongs not to those who are surprised, but to those who, like Patton's Third Army on December 19, 1944, are already in motion. Patton received no special medal for the relief of Bastogne. Oscar Koch remained largely obscure. The official narrative often emphasized surprise and recovery over prescient preparation. Yet the military lesson was indelible. Intelligence is only as valuable as the commander who acts upon it. Preparation is only effective if leaders trust their planners. The Battle of the Bulge was a supreme failure of high-level intelligence assumptions, but it was also the story of a single general who chose to listen and prepare. That is why George Patton was ready, not from luck or recklessness, but from meticulous preparation. And in warfare, preparation is everything. The successful relief of Bastogne did not mark the conclusion of the Ardennes crisis. It represented a pivotal turning point. While the corridor was tenuous and the battle far from decided, Patton's Third Army had delivered a decisive psychological and operational blow. The German timetable, meticulously crafted for blitzkrieg speed, was irrevocably shattered. The initiative, so decisively seized by the Wehrmacht on December 16th, now began to seep back toward the Allies. Patton, however, was not content with a static relief. His objective shifted from mere rescue to aggressive counter-offensive. He pressed his commanders relentlessly, demanding they widen the corridor, attack the flanks of the German Bulge, and ultimately drive the enemy back to their original positions. This phase of the operation was characterized by grueling attritional warfare in some of the most forbidding winter conditions of the century. Temperatures plummeted, freezing men and machinery alike. The landscape, a picturesque tableau in peacetime, became a nightmarish chessboard of snow-drifted forests, icy roads, and villages transformed into fortified strongpoints. The German forces, though stunned by the rapidity of Patton's response, were far from defeated. Elite units like the 1st SS Panzer Division and experienced Volksgrenadier divisions fought with desperate tenacity, understanding that this offensive represented the Reich's last strategic gamble in the West. They launched fierce local counterattacks against the shoulders of the Bulge, particularly around the towns of Saint-Vith and Elsenborn Ridge, seeking to collapse the Allied reaction before it could gain full momentum. Meanwhile, the Allied command structure underwent a critical adjustment. Recognizing the need for unified command north of the Bulge to manage the crisis effectively, Eisenhower temporarily placed Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery in command of all U.S. 1st and 9th Armies on the northern shoulder. This controversial decision, while operationally sound, rankled American sensibilities and would later become a source of significant post-war dispute. On the southern shoulder, Patton's Third Army continued its drive, now operating in closer concert with Courtney Hodges' embattled First Army as the pincers of the Allied counterattack slowly began to close. The true test of Patton's logistical foresight was now. The pre-positioned supplies that had fueled the initial thrust were being consumed at a prodigious rate. Maintaining the offensive required a Herculean sustainment effort. The famed Red Ball Express truck convoys were rerouted and pushed to their limits on treacherous roads. Air resupply, when the notoriously foul Ardennes weather permitted, played a vital role. Patton's earlier insistence on detailed logistical planning meant that, while strained, his supply chains did not break. Fuel and ammunition continued to flow to the front, enabling relentless pressure. By early January 1945, with improving weather, the full might of Allied air power, tactical fighters and heavy bombers alike, returned to the skies with devastating effect. German columns, already hampered by fuel shortages and congested roads, were savaged from the air. This air interdiction strangled German mobility and morale, cementing the shifting tide of the battle. The final phase of the campaign was a methodical, costly squeeze. American, British, and Allied forces attacked from north and south, compressing the Bulge. Fierce battles raged for key towns and road junctions: Oufalise, La Roche-en-Ardenne, Saint-Hubert. Each was a brutal struggle in the snow. By late January, the German salient had been eliminated. The front line was restored to, and in places pushed beyond, its position of December 15th. The Wehrmacht's last strategic reserve in the west had been crippled, its armoured strength gutted, and its best remaining infantry divisions bled white.